I asked the backers of our recent Kickstarter for some feedback on the course. I wanted to know what, I'm going to say you, if you are watching the video, which you likely are, what your expectations were, what you liked in the tutorials, didn't like, what you wanted to learn about, etc. If you're not a backer, you can find a copy of that form in the description. I've made two forms to separate the persons who supported the campaign financially and the community in general. Note that the data in this form is anonymous and that I will be sharing everything with fellow tutorial makers and the community. I've converted it to a Reveal.js presentation. You can also find the code that's open source in the description. It takes the base data as a table and it converts it to an org document like so. So a tree of nodes that then gets exported to a Reveal.js presentation. The advantage being the nice transitions that you get visually, but also if you press escape, you can quickly navigate through the file as a grid and see how many answers you got or which answers you got for each entry. To start with, I wanted to get a sense for who the backers were, individually, replying to the form, but also overall. When it comes to game creation, a lot of people are hobbyists, and it makes sense. That's the case for the channel as well. Most people making games do this for pleasure in general, and being a professional game developer is a lot more demanding. However, a lot of you code for a living, a little more than I expected. At least these are the persons who replied to the form, responded to the form, and who backed the project. I think the stats will be different for the public form, even though considering that a lot of the content that we made was a bit demanding, I can understand that there are not so many people doing code just for fun, casually, watching the tutorials or backing them even, because we don't make content for super beginners. At least that has not been the focus of the channel. It's not step by step, etc. So I see that we have quite a few persons who have professional experience, have some foundations, and actually I'm more worried about the persons who say they have no experience and who never opened Godot. It's something you'll see in the next slide. If you're a professional, if you never used Godot, shouldn't be a problem to watch the tutorial. But if you never wrote a line of code before, I mean, it's in the course's prerequisites. I've put it in the Kickstarter as well. You have to learn to code. You have to have some foundations to follow our tutorials, the course, but just to learn game programming and game creation in general. You can't start just from zero, jump into a game engine, which is super complex. A game engine is millions and millions of lines of code, thousands of features, and they assume that you have some programming foundations before you get started. A few exceptions aside, like game develop maybe, for example, things like these. To follow the course this time, it's, if you're in these three parts, learn some foundations, made some personal projects, or finished a game with Godot, even though we are going to make beginner-friendly series, the free ones, these are the persons we target. Persons who have at least opened Godot, went through some beginner tutorials and through the start of the manual. Anyway, it will be in the prerequisite of the course, so we'll talk about that again. Would you use assignments? We want to add assignments to the new course, much more than the previous one, to think a lot more about the teaching goals, and we've talked about that with Razvan. I'm really looking forward to working with him on that and working with you who follow the course. We're going to put assignments on the free version as well. Last question to get started, the topics that most people are interested in. Code structure is a very common one. Level design in general, I want to put a bit more game design in this course, so we're going to talk about that. I think I didn't do it well enough in the previous course. It's really something I can improve on. Game feel, It's going to be a big thing as well. Again, pure game design. Artificial intelligence is one that comes back. It's a tricky one because artificial intelligence is one that comes back in general among the popular ones. AI is going to be a tricky one to cover because you can have pattern-based artificial intelligence, or you can have really an AI that's going to track the player, that's going to be a little smart, and there's enough to cover for an entire course just with that, making decent artificial intelligence. So we'll have to see how we cover that one. I'm not sure at this point that we will focus on that in there. The problem is if we cover everything you can see on screen here, we need to produce probably 100 videos or more, and the scope of the course is much smaller this time around because we have 2 courses to create and versions that are going to be public, others that are going to be premium, and 2D and 3D. There's really a lot of ground to cover. Anyway, that's it for the basics. From there, I'm going to take the presentation, read everything. I already started reading that and taking notes, but also zoom in on a few of these requests, expectations, and comment on them as I go. You can find a report document as well in which I've compiled some important notes, and I am going through every single entry and writing down everything that I think applies to our work. I'm not saying some of the things might be absolutely valid requests, but that don't necessarily fit what we do or the budget that we have and the scope of the project. For example, people asking for us to cover, where was it? How to create games from start to finish, learning Godot from zero, and game programming up until the final game released on app stores, and all step by step. This is not what we're going to do with this course, and we've announced it before. So those kinds of things you won't see in the report, but for example, that, how to organize the game project, quite important. We're definitely going to talk a bit about that as usual. I get requests like these on a regular basis. This one is surprising because it's from a professional developer, but a good plan to make the code without having to refactor as the size increases. You can use some techniques to make your code modular in general, and we're going to show that using aggregation in Godot, splitting your features into different scenes, but in general you will have to refactor some things as the complexity the project increases and the design changes. You end up throwing code away and rewriting code in game, especially if you want to make a good game. When a mechanic does not work, you scrap it, you start over. You can't avoid that, and projects can become messy. That's also why we prototype. You want to prototype quickly, fail quickly, and figure out which ideas work the best, so you don't have to rewrite really large chunks of the game later in the project and into production. But roughly the first half of the production of the game, you want to be ready to throw a lot of stuff away and to refactor a lot of stuff as you move forward. Here's an example of the notes I don't keep. Someone who's never used Godot, who's a professional developer, but requesting a course that would go from not knowing anything about Godot to making a professional project, meaning covering the UI, or that's what I understand here, is opening the editor from the first time, the language, etc., to publishing the game. This was clearly stated on the Kickstarter that's beyond the scope of this project. Now, another thing is this person says, I've never looked at GDQuest, and another thing that we say and that I mention in every Kickstarter is watch our tutorials before you back the course, because of course you want to know the education style, etc., before you put your money on buying one of the courses. We have dozens and dozens of free tutorials. But the thing about that is in the work we are doing, I'm not trying to trap you in our company when it comes to education. When it comes to Godot in particular, there are other resources that are out there, and we want to build upon these. We are working with the Godot developers, so what I want is to direct you to the really good resources that are out there, and then we create tutorials and courses about topics or with approaches that do not exist already. So that's why, as part of the Kickstarter, we are working on guides to compile free resources that you can use to get up to speed with Godot if you're a beginner or a professional developer. So you will find that in the course as part of this project. We will be working on that. Okay, so the next one is a variation on the previous example. The person, however, is talking about, I'd like to see a complete game no matter how simple, so that is doable. That covers everything needed: layout, loading levels, pausing, save game, etc. Beyond covering what nodes are available and how they work, showing how the various good features come together to make a game, rather than looking at isolated part, which makes it feel more abstract. Yes, in the previous course, I went ahead and decided to cover different aspects of creating a game, for example, combat mechanics or character movement, into separate chapters, because there is a lot to say about each of these. And it works for quite a few persons, despite being an uncommon approach to teaching. But it's not as accessible as showing how to put everything together from the start. So it's definitely something to consider in this course. I will take note of that. Another note that's interesting, and that I think is a common problem that not everyone is able to formulate, but if you ask people, I can follow your tutorial. What I struggle with is following a design target I have set and planned out for myself, and that differs greatly from your tutorials. Common problem, that's normal, that's part of design and development. It's a problem-solving activity, which I think I've said in a few instances. And that, finding a way to help you do that, it's really hard. I haven't figured out how to help people take the code they have in the tutorials. You have to make it yourself. I think that's where we can try to help with the assignments, because you have to struggle to figure out solutions to these problems. And at least maybe I should try to make a video to insist on that, or not just a video, but to mention it on regular occasions in the videos, to say you will have to struggle to figure out how to implement your own design, and you will have to move away from the patterns that we cover. So also covering more patterns and adding more tools to your tool belt, like you're mentioning that one of these kinds of tutorials was one of the ones you like the most, is also one of the ways to go. You add tools to your tool belt, you experiment with them to learn to manipulate them. So can be some design patterns, can be some, it doesn't have to be code structure techniques, there are design techniques and principles in general, like working with rhythm, learning to get people to test your games, getting critiques, and working hard to try to assess these critiques and to fix some of the issues that other people suggest. And this is also a common issue. Some of the things that we teach in tutorials, individual features, the editors, sometimes they can seem like they are covered in isolation from the context of a real game. The problem is, if we don't isolate them, it's harder to understand the feature, and showing them in context every time would be extremely time consuming to cover properly in every tutorial. But I think this bounces back and ties back into people asking for us to cover game creation from start to finish on a given project, which, well, I'm going to try to have us move a little more towards. This one's interesting. So this person struggles with time management, project organization, and scope. And yep, you are a hobbyist, but it's not too important because professionals also have this issue. It's very common in game development because it's just super hard to know how much time a game production is going to take. If you want to manage that, I'm going to give a short answer here. First, you need to not plan how much time the game is going to take and not have a budget at first. You need to advance a little bit in the dark. Managing scope. The problem is if you want to create a good game, because there's a lot of experimentation involved, the only way you can manage the scope is to only focus on the core mechanics for as long as you can and to design subtractively. That is, instead of trying to add features, try to remove ideas and to filter ideas out and make the game work with as few mechanics as possible and as few controls that you can polish as much as possible. Note that making a good game is not necessarily making a game that will sell very well. That's another problem. But I'll assume here, being a hobbyist and who's made personal projects with Godot, that you are not going to commercialize your games really quickly. So that, if you want to manage time well, you have to be willing to do lots of short prototypes, to get people to test them and to get feedback and critiques on them, to ensure that the game is pleasant for those persons, and you want to measure the time you spend on every task that you write down and that you prioritize when you are working on the game. So you measure that until you reach the point that you have enough feedback, made enough prototypes, and have the vertical slice of gameplay for your game that is a complete slice that people like, that's representative of what your game will be like in the end. And then from there you can plan the game. There's a GDC talk from year 2000 or something like that that states that it takes half of the full production cycle of a game to just pre-produce it, and that until the end of pre-production you cannot know how much time it's going to take to create the full game. The way we build our tutorials and courses is the same actually. It takes about half of the time before I can know, okay, it's going to take that much time to finish the entire project. For example, at this stage, pre-producing the course, I have no idea. Even if I say from the start it's going to be 40 videos, for example, this can vary based on the budget that we have, etc., and the requests from viewers. If people say the course is too short, it's lacking content, of course I'm going to add some more. Or if people say these 5 videos are absolutely terrible or unintelligible, they are very, very bad, well, I'm going to remake them. With a game, it's the same idea. You want to scrap the parts that are not working well, and so you want to fail pretty fast as well. That's one of the reasons why I'm making a parallel with the course, because that's what we're creating right now here, but why I'm pushing a lot of stuff out to the public. The tutorials, I'm looking at all the comments on YouTube, for example, and taking notes of things that went wrong in the tutorials, saying, okay, this one, this is a failure, we can make this improvement, or asking you all this feedback here early on in the project before we commit too much resources into production and we can't really backtrack. I'm going to finish with this one, which makes a lot of sense, but I want to answer that common request to make written content. Note that you will find more notes in the report document, link in the description, but that's just where I'm going to end the video because otherwise it's going to be a bit too long. Why don't we make so many blog entries? Well, it's simply a matter of discoverability. That is, when I do that, there are too few persons who just read them. So we have had a few on GDQuest. I made some in the manual. But the thing is, when we make YouTube videos, we build upon the numerous persons who've been watching the channel, and we benefit from the YouTube platform bringing people to watch the videos. When you write blogs, it's not the case. You don't get Google to or search engines in general to send you lots of people. YouTube is trying to share your content. It's trying to keep people on the platform, so it will suggest tutorials that people might be interested in if they are watching a related tutorial. Well, if you're on Google or on a search engine, you have to really search for a given topic, and then the website has to rank well on that topic, which is hard when you face really big websites. While on YouTube, even if you are small, if you answer a specific question, you will not necessarily get beaten by other less related videos. So this makes it so we get two things. One, we get a lot of people to discover the free and open source tools that we contribute to. And second, we get the community to grow, which we need if we want to keep the team growing, if we want to improve the quality and the scope of our projects, which we want to do, and get to work with eventually other teams, maybe find sponsors and things like these. See, for example, now we have gotten big enough with this project to get a sponsorship from Purism. And the thing is, yes, investing time in written content would not only take a lot of time, even writing tutorials from the videos, it really takes a lot of time, and it takes a great deal of experience. I have experience doing technical writing professionally, and it's time consuming and difficult. So that's why it's like doing GDQuest is already not a super lucrative business and project. Money is not the goal of the project, but doing written content in parallel would mean taking time and resources from the YouTube channel, which in turn would slow down the growth overall, and GDQuest has not been growing fast compared to if you were to cover something a lot more popular. You know, when we do Godot tutorials, for example, we get people to discover Godot at this point still, even if it's growing in popularity. It's not like if I were to start a channel about Unity, for example, it's the other way around. Being completely unknown on the internet, I could get traffic and people just because the user base on Unity is so big, and you just have to jump onto covering the features in the latest version that people haven't found the time to cover yet, so you can quickly become related to content from other content creators who cover Unity, etc. Well, there are way fewer persons doing that for Godot, so you cannot get as much traffic from related videos, for example. That's a really rough perspective. I could explain that in greater details, but yeah, that's that. But I have contributed to the official docs and manual, and that's the way I would go about doing written blog entries and those kinds of things, contributing to the manual, which already has a lot of content and can really benefit from my work in this case. And anyway, I'm not going to, if I do it on my personal website or if we do it on GDQuest.com, it would be just too hard to get people to read the content, so better contribute to the official manual. Anyway, there's a lot left to explore. Well, as I told you at the beginning, I've already read quite a few. I was going back through them for the video. You will find a document in the video description that gives you some more insights or notes about what I've extracted from the document, things that I consider relevant to the project. It's not just about, there's more feedback that I understand, find valid, etc., but that might be beyond the scope of the project or beyond the scope of what we can do in general at GDQuest. You can also find the data in the video description. It's open, and you can find a form to give your feedback if you are not a backer of the project. I will also read all the entries with the same attention. That's it. I want to thank you kindly for watching. Be creative, have fun. See you in the next one. Bye-bye.